Welcome to the Brain Injury Association of New York State's webinar training, Understanding Life with Brain Injury. I am Carla Giovanniello, Brain Injury Training and Services Project Director here at the Association. Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, a few housekeeping details. Because of limited time, we ask that you please hold your questions until the end of the presentation. During the question and answer session, questions can be submitted via the question text box. The text box option should be visible to you on your GoToWebinar toolbar on your desktop. If you are having trouble viewing this option, please contact Citrix Tech Support at 1-800-263-6317. Again, that number is 1-800-263-6317. This number should also be visible on your toolbar. Our speaker will do her best to answer questions in the order that they are received. Any questions she is unable to address may be submitted via email to the Association. Training materials will be emailed to attendees within the next week. Certificates of attendance will also be sent to participants who complete the webinar exit survey. This survey will be displayed once the webinar session has concluded. We will be recording this webinar session and plan to post it, along with the presentation slides and materials, to our website, www.BIA.NYS.org. Information about contacting the Association and viewing the webinar will be provided in a follow-up email after the presentation has ended. My contact information will also be included in those follow-up messages. Before I turn the microphone over to Judy, let us begin with a quick poll to see who is in our audience today. Please take a moment to answer the question. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to answer before I start the polls. All right, I'm closing the poll and sharing the results. All right, so it looks like we have 34% answered, I am a healthcare professional or provider. 20% answered, I am a TBI Waiver provider. 17% answered, I am a community service provider. 1% is affiliated with a veterans organization, and 28% answered other. I am always interested in who those other people are, so if you would like to send me a comment in the question box saying who you are or who you work for, I would love to know. So thank you. It looks like we do have some variety today, and that's wonderful as an organizer. It's truly a privilege to be part of the planning process, and today we have an especially large audience, I believe one of the largest we've ever had. So thank you all again for your participation and for helping spread the word about our monthly webinars. Please continue to do so. And it is now with sincere pleasure that I introduce the Brain Injury Association of New York State's Executive Director and our webinar presenter for today, Judith Avner. Judy, good morning.
Good morning, Carla, and good morning, everybody. Just to echo Carla's comments of welcome to all of you. We're really glad that you have decided to participate this morning on this webinar entitled Understanding Life with Brain Injury. We are accustomed, or I should say I have been presenting this particular training for the past maybe 7 or 8 years around New York State, always live and interactive, and so I hope you'll bear with me as we present it today in the form of a webinar. We wanted to do it as a webinar because it certainly makes it more easily accessible to a greater number of folks, and particularly given the constraints of time and budgets, travel becomes much more difficult than it was a number of years ago. And so we're really delighted so many of you are taking advantage of this opportunity. The slides, as Carla said, will be posted on the website, and the webinar is being recorded, so it will be accessible for those who were not able to be here today with us. Now, I will talk a little bit as we go through this about what the format is going to be today. I'm accustomed to doing some of this in an interactive way, so it is a little challenging, but I think we will. Get through this just fine. So, without further ado, we will get started. Okay, so just this presentation is not really chock full of statistics. It's not necessary for that because by and large people who will be involved in the training are involved in some way with brain injury. I was interested in the poll results. As Carla said, I too am always interested in the other category because within that it just includes such a broad range of possibilities. However, it's clear that we do have a number of providers. I don't know if within the provider audience we have people who are in supervisory positions or who are in directors of training in some of the larger organizations and the like. But in any event, no matter how you present this, it's always important, I think, just to start with a few comments in order to kind of set the context about why we're talking about brain injury. Beyond that, this is what we do in our day-to-day lives. So, of course, we still talk about brain injury as a silent epidemic, the numbers affecting far more people than anybody really ever thinks. 3.1 million Americans live with a brain injury, and the latest numbers from the CDC tell us that a brain injury occurs every 18.5 seconds. Now, some of you may be familiar with the numbers. We used to use brain injury occurring every 23 seconds, 21 seconds, and now 18.5 seconds. And so you can really kind of put that next to a watch and understand that every minute 3 people sustain a brain injury. And so that's really a pretty significant number of individuals affected by brain injury. And that becomes just an important way to help people understand why it's important that we focus on this and why we are talking about brain injury. Now, just a little history. A number of years ago, the Brain Injury Association of New York State surveyed individuals with brain injury who were receiving services under New York State's home and community-based brain injury waiver. And we did a sampling of those. And what we found was that the majority of individuals who participated in this survey indicated that they were satisfied with their services. And that, of course, suggests that a good job is being done by those of you who are providing services through the DOH waiver, Department of Health waiver. However, the individuals surveyed also said that they would like direct care staff to know more about experiencing life with brain injury. And in addition to that, many participants indicated that they themselves were unclear, uninformed, or hesitant to request services and changes within their particular constellation of waiver services that they were receiving under the program. Some participants indicated that they did not understand or that they could not properly exercise the personal choices that were available to them within their service plan and within the waiver program. And so the Department of Health subcontracted with the Brain Injury Association of New York State to develop a training program that directly responded to those two concerns. One, the wish that service providers knew a lot more about life with brain injury. What people articulated was that they often found that they or their family members had to be the teachers about brain injury for their service providers before they could begin to receive services. So this training was designed to respond to that need, and in addition to focus on the whole area of participants' rights. So in its initial format, the training was designed specifically for waiver providers. However, over the years, we've expanded the focus, and so now it is, in fact, a little more generic, not only for waiver providers, but for any providers of services to people with brain injuries, and also for any kind of the services. Again, the initial focus was on home and community support staff, HCSS, but it is really the points and the discussions, the material that will be covered really is far broader than HCSS. I will at various times make specific reference to home and community support staff, but that will not be frequently, as much of what we'll talk about is more generalizable to any staff providing services. We were also asked to develop this program in a train-the-trainer format, and that is what we have done. So a few words about what that will look like for you today. As I said, this is done in a train-the-trainer format. So I will be in the best form of train-the-trainer training. It's quite a tongue twister so early in the morning. I will be going through the training to model a way in which to provide the training. Periodically, as we go through this, I will be making some references or suggestions for those of you who will be providing the training yourself, so that you can figure out various points of reference, either places where you might want to give people a break, or you might want to break this into modules. I'll talk about that. Different places where you can expect a fair amount of discussion, some of the questions that come up, just so that you can be prepared for those kinds of things. When we developed the training, we did present the training to a group of home and community support staff at 2 agencies, and we did modify it based on our experience and based on the comments, and so we'll be sharing some of that with you. Now, because this is a train-the-trainer model, those of you in agencies will be getting a training packet after this webinar, and Carla will talk to you about the details of getting access to that. And among the materials you'll be getting are a script, a set of presentation slides. The script goes along with that and is chock full of comments to make, suggestions, various kinds of helping points for you to make this an effective training. You will also get a set of handouts that you can duplicate and use when you deliver the training, and also a DVD, which I will mention. Unfortunately, we don't have the technology to show you the DVD. If we were doing this live in person, I would be showing you the DVD as well. DVD itself is called Living in the Moment, and I will talk about that in a moment. You'll either have access to these materials through the website or perhaps in a jump drive. And as I said, Carla will kind of give you some of the instructions about that as well. Now, before we get into the training, your materials will also include a pre-training questionnaire, and then the same questionnaire, of course, which you can use as a post-training questionnaire. And again, this is just a tool that some of you in delivering the training may want to use, just to, of course, you will assure folks that this is not a test. They're not graded on it. But just as a way of individuals participating in the training can kind of gauge for themselves their level of knowledge at the beginning of the training, and then you may choose to use it again at the end of the training and determine whether or not or how much an individual has learned from participating in the training. That's in the materials that you can get after the training, and I won't go through it. The other kind of preface comment I just want to make is that for some of you, as we go through the next hour and a half together, for some of you, I'm sure the material that I'm going to be presenting will seem elementary or will be material that you already are familiar with. I just want to remind you that, again, this is being presented as a train the trainer. This is how you might present this information to people who are providing services within your various agencies, whether it's a waiver provider in the veterans service provision community or in the general brain injury community. So just understand that it really is going over how to present or suggestions of how to present some of this material in a way that's been tested and has been effective. So you might want to start by sharing with people in the training the objectives of the training itself, which is to support direct care staff in their work and your work to increase the professionalism, and that has to do with the job satisfaction. Again, in talking with people who are delivering these services, one of the concerns that they have expressed is that they're not treated in a professional manner, sometimes by the clients, but also in their agencies. And so it also is about increasing professionalism, promoting respect for the work that direct care staff do. Much of that work is extremely difficult. We would all agree with that, and yet these individuals who are delivering the services don't necessarily hear that their work is valued and respected for its difficulty and for the way in which they do deliver the services. And finally, of course, to improve the quality of services to individuals with brain injuries. And that really is the common mission that brings all of us together in the work that we do from wherever we sit in relation to that. So, okay, so we suggest that you start in the first part of the training. Training really can be divided into 3 or 4 different modules, and I will suggest where you might have different breaks. The first place we would start is with suggesting icebreakers and introductions. Unfortunately, we're not together. If we were together, we would be experiencing one of these, which I will talk about firsthand, and it really is fun. Now, I personally am a person who hates playing games, much to the chagrin of my family and friends. I'm just not good at the games. And whenever I'm in a training or a meeting or something and people talk about, okay, now we'll do an icebreaker, and they ask some what I think are bizarre questions, or I'm always the one who makes faces about it, I just want to suggest that there are a few reasons really for doing an icebreaker in this context. First of all, it's important to get everybody involved in the training, and the icebreakers we are suggesting also provide some education about brain injury, just to try to bring people into, move them out of their own self and their own kind of personal space, and bring them into a conversation about brain injury, bring them into the world of brain injury. We also think it's good to set a more casual, informal environment in which people will be receptive to learning, will be thinking about how the information that they will be receiving applies to the work that they're doing, and also comfortable asking questions and knowing that nobody is being judged. This is about education. This is about learning. The other thing is that depending on the group that is in the training, it may well be that you have people who don't know each other, that they work out in the community. They may be, if they're providing home and community support services, or some of those providing independent living skills training, some of the other services are not together in one central place. They spend the majority of their time in an individual's home or in a different setting. And so you may have people that are doing the same kind of work for the same agency, but because they're dispersed, they don't know each other. They have no idea who each other is. They may never have met each other. And so it's important to try to create a common bond, a community within that group. And that will, we think, just provides so many benefits over the long term in terms of your staff feeling connected with the organization and with other people in the organization that are providing the same kinds of services, and be a resource ultimately for each other to do some group problem solving, which we'll talk about, and just to be there just to share some of their experiences. Now, our experience when we were pilot testing the training was that there was no shortage of conversation. And in fact, as we've delivered this in person, there's been no shortage of conversation as we go through it. So we, in the training materials that you'll receive after, we give you 3 different icebreakers. You can use any one that you like. You may have others that your agency uses or that other groups in which you have participated use that you like and the like. My personal favorite is the one called the Neural Connection. And some of you participating here on the webinar may have been involved either with me or with others in doing this. Now this one involves koosh balls. You remember those soft, well, there's a picture of it there, that blue and green little ball. Those soft little balls that are very hard to leave alone. You're always very tactile, so you're always playing with those. And this really calls on having a group together, and you'll find as you try to do this that there will be lots of people who will just not want to play. And so it's important to get people up and working like that. Okay, so you're going to arrange participants, just to tell you quickly, you're going to arrange participants around a room in a circle or an oval or some shape that doesn't have a beginning and an end. You're going to use the koosh balls one at a time to ask them to throw to each other to create a pattern. You're going to tell them the only thing they need to know is who threw the koosh to them and to whom they're throwing it. And as they develop a pattern, you can start adding another koosh ball and yet another so that there's more than one going around trying to create and replicate the same pattern. And as you are going to do that, you're going to be talking about indicating that we're really trying to, in a very macro way, trying to get a sense of how the brain sends messages, really sent from neuron to neuron through neurotransmitters. And we're just going to be sent that. We know the brain doesn't work in a linear fashion, and neither will your pattern. And what you're going to do at various times is kind of give directions that make things a little more complicated, just so that again, you're bringing people into some ways in which the brain functions after it's damaged. So you might say, for example, anybody wearing eyeglasses only catch with your left hand, only throw with your left hand. And some people will start dropping the koosh ball. You'll want them to pick it up and keep going around. Or you may say now people who are wearing blue have to, after they catch the koosh ball, put it around their body and then keep going. However you change this will have an impact on the pattern, and particularly as you get more complicated. And finally, I always like to take something big, pick some group, maybe everybody with blonde hair. I don't know. You look at the characteristics of the group and say, you're now out of the game, and ask them to step back. And what will happen is that the pattern will come to a halt. And although it's very hard to let silence reign, you need to do that a little bit as people begin to figure out what to do next. Can they recreate a pattern, do another pattern? And that, of course, is your opportunity. Just say, this is something that happens when the brain is damaged. The pattern stops. The pattern is interrupted and may stop. But over time, the brain may start to rebuild a new pattern. maybe not as elegant or as efficient, but begin to function in a different way. In any event, I have never seen this not be a lot of fun, and everybody laughs, and so it does create community as well as being a quick lesson in brain and in brain functioning. The second one we give you is something called 20 characteristics of brain injury, and essentially it's an empathy building experience that also increases understanding of common characteristics of brain injury. And there are characteristics, we give you all of that. People in the group pick out, you put them in a box, people pick out 2 or 3 characteristics, and they become characteristics of that individual's brain injury. So that, for example, if somebody pulls out the characteristic acts without thinking, then that person, in thinking about his or her brain injury, will incorporate I act without thinking. Okay, and after that, the staff participating will identify these characteristics of their brain injury and discuss how the characteristics might impact on their daily activities, okay, or the daily activities that the individuals with whom to whom they're providing services act. So that, for example, if mine is acts without thinking and I am providing some HCSS services, I may understand that this impulsivity may have me throwing things. And so maybe I'll think about that a little more as a direct service provider. The third one, the empathy box, is also a lot of fun. This requires the agency or organization to pull together a few things in advance. And it really is based on the experience that many individuals with disabilities have, where they're ridiculed or they're treated inappropriately because people see them as quote-unquote different or quote-unquote abnormal or in some way set aside. So frequently this is caused not by cruelty, but really because people have very little understanding of disabilities. I'm frankly embarrassed that in 2013 we have to still be talking about this. And although progress has been made certainly over the years, we still know that society in general has a significant amount of misunderstanding or little understanding of disabilities themselves, and really very little empathy, very little sense of what it must feel like to live with a physical or a cognitive disability. And so the whole idea behind the empathy box is to try in some way to invite people into some experiences. So that, for example, you might have, this is a very artful term, you might have a squiggle pen, which you can get at Toys R Us, any of the toy stores, which is a pen that shakes, makes it very hard to write. And so that kind of simulates ataxia, simulates nerve damage, which may occur when a person sustains a brain injury and the like. And you have the person try to write their name on a blank check or in a small space, the way we all have in all sorts of forms, and see how challenging that might be. You also might include double vision glasses that might simulate some of the double vision and other kinds of vision-related difficulties that an individual with brain injury has. And so you might ask somebody to put on the double vision glasses and try to read something. You can get an eye chart even from a local eye place and see how difficult really that is. There's also an experience that has to do with tactile function, because for some people after sustaining a brain injury, sense of touch may be affected. And here you would have, say, a large bowl, some white cotton gloves, a blindfold, rice, and hiding items like paper clips or jacks pen tops, pennies, small things in that, and have people try to reach in and try to identify the items just by feeling them. That also just might be difficult. And then ambient noise. Now, this is something that the sensitivity to ambient noise is something that many people experience. And in fact, sometimes in presenting the training, you might want to have some music on. I wouldn't say quiet classical music, although you certainly can use that, but some music perhaps with a heavy beat, with words on even at a normal, or what is you might consider a normal volume. Doesn't even have to be loud, but a volume. And then at some point start talking at a regular, at your regular level, and see how long it takes for people to realize that you're talking. And again, what this simulates is how difficult it is often for a person with a brain injury to filter out the noises in his or her environment. Talk about, you get into the experience of the filtering out of ambient noises and those kinds of things. So in any event, the neural connection, the 20 characteristics, the empathy box are just 3 icebreakers that we suggest as ways of getting things going. And then after the icebreakers, we would suggest before you get into the meat of the training that you either have an individual with a brain injury come and speak to the group about living with a brain injury, his or her experience and story, and ask that person in advance to be sure to share with your group what he or she thinks it's important for service providers to know. Or you might share or show the 17-minute DVD that we have called Living in the Moment, which your agencies will get a copy of, that shares the perspectives of 3 individuals with brain injury and a number of service providers about providing those services. And again, the purpose here is to make this come alive. If you're providing the service, the training, particularly at the beginning, before somebody has actually been in the field providing services, this really makes brain injury come alive for that individual. If you are providing the training to individuals who have already been providing the services, our experience is what it does is reinforce for people their own experiences and might generate some conversation and all. So, and then we suggest that after this point, you might want to take a break. Again, it depends on what your training schedule looks like and how much you're planning to cover at one time. This might be the end of a short kind of introductory training orientation, and so the community building introduction may be your primary goal of the first segment of the training, and so you would take a break. However, since we're doing this as a webinar, you all may be taking a break, but I, alas, have to forge on, and so I will forge on to what might be the second module or the second piece of this. And this second piece of the training is really focusing on developing and enhancing sensitivity, really understanding what occurs following a brain injury, how an individual with a brain injury experiences everyday life occurrences. You'll examine the common experiences for people with brain injuries, such as short-term memory loss, attention challenges, concentration problems, impulsivity, and the like. So the objectives here are to demonstrate a general understanding of brain injury, skills for understanding the individualized nature of brain injury, common changes in a person after a brain injury, and connecting the nature of brain injury with the types of behaviors displayed. So the first part explains how the brain functions. And again, the purpose here is not to turn everybody into an expert on brain functioning and brain injury, but really, again, to raise the basic level of knowledge and understanding. And the second part provides guidelines and now generic skills for understanding and working with individuals with brain injury. So the brain, of course, controls everything we do, and you're just going to want to reinforce that. We don't really think about our brains. We just take for granted that they operate, sometimes better than other times, but we don't really think about it. And so it's important to, frankly, go back to basics and understand that the brain controls everything that we do. Every function we have is controlled by the brain. And then we move into a section that talks about definitions. And it's important to talk about definitions because, frankly, there are so many terms that are thrown around these days and that are often used interchangeably when, in fact, they're not exactly the same. And so the purpose of the next few slides is really to provide that information and explanation for people in the training. Now, please bear with me here. Again, many of you may be aware of these things. Some of you maybe not and may be learning this with us. But remember that the whole purpose is to be able to teach this and share this information. So we suggest starting with talking about acquired brain injury. And then we'll talk about what's included and what's not included. Because acquired brain injury has been, or ABI, has really been used a lot more frequently now, and that is in fact a global term, a much broader term than perhaps the more familiar TBI, which we'll talk about. And so what you're going to be doing is sharing some general information about what is within acquired brain injury and what is not, and we'll go through that. But the important piece of this slide is the point that traumatic brain injury is really a subset of acquired brain injury. And so when we use traumatic brain injury, it's not as broad as acquired brain injury. And so then you can go on and talk about the definition of traumatic brain injury and some examples here, which are the common examples when we're using the definition. Now, oftentimes, the term acquired brain injury and traumatic brain injury are used interchangeably, and that's just not correct. And that's why it's important to have people understand. Our programs work with people and support people who have both acquired brain injury, the broader term, and traumatic brain injury. But it is important nonetheless to understand that these are different, that these are not the same causes of injuries, and you're going to be looking at those kinds of things. As the slide says, often included, especially for service provision, is you'll include people who have sustained injuries as a result of a stroke or as a result of an aneurysm. And there's more of that as a result of a tumor. So here's a question. Which of these would not be classified as an acquired brain injury? An aneurysm, Alzheimer's disease, anoxia, traumatic brain injury, and concussion. And
I'm going to launch the poll now, so everyone has about 10 seconds to answer. About 5 more seconds before I close the poll. All right, I'm closing the poll now, and I'm going to share the results. All right, it looks like most people answered Alzheimer's disease, which is 71%, 5% aneurysm, 3% anoxia, 11% TBI, and 10% concussion.
So we see that many of you have this, the rest of you will, but it's really understanding that the acquired brain injury is the broader term. And so the aneurysm, anoxia, which is deprivation of oxygen to the brain, concussion, which is quote-unquote mild brain injury, which I'll come back to, would be an acquired brain injury or traumatic brain injury and traumatic brain injury. It's Alzheimer's disease. That really is excluded from that definition. And so acquired brain injury includes all of these things and can include more. These are just some of the most common mechanisms. Excuse me. We could include domestic violence under traumatic brain injury, assault, those kinds of things. Oh, my goodness, excuse me. That 10 seconds gave me a chance to take a drink, but or to have some water, excuse me, let me clarify. Okay, so acquired brain injury excludes congenital disorders. Intellectual disabilities is the current term for mental retardation that we use now. And cerebral palsy, birth injuries, progressive disorders, and psychiatric disorders. Okay, so why is this important? This is really important in the provision of services because the individuals that you and your programs are working with are individuals who sustain their injury after some period of what we might call typical development, whatever that looks like. It may be as a full-grown adult. It may be as a full-grown adult living life without a disability. It may be as a child who sustained the injury at some point in their childhood, in their adolescence. But the point is that they have lived a part of their life without a disability. Okay, so that the changes from the brain injury not only may impact functioning of the brain, but may also lead to psychosocial changes that may affect self-esteem, that may affect their relationships, that may affect their ability to be successful in social, educational, vocational environments, those kinds of things. And we'll come back to that as we go through things. But it's important just to remember that we are talking about people who did have some period of life with more typical development and all. So, and that would be the critical piece to talk about. Next, you might want to spend a little time on discussing how brain damage occurs. And again, this is not meant to be a primer on neurology or neuroanatomy, but really just to give some basic information. You want to reinforce that the brain is extremely complex, and most importantly, that everything is related, because we know from some of the pictures and some of our models that we have nice graphics that divide the brain. I had one earlier in the slides that divide the brain into these discrete lobes of the brain, and we can say which area of the brain has responsibility for a particular form or a particular function or set of functions. But in fact, it's not as neat as our little pictures, because parts of the brain, every part of the brain is related to every other part of the brain. So that although an injury may occur in one area of the brain and you may see the most profound impact in that area of the brain, in reality, other areas of the brain may be affected as well, or the communication links may be disrupted as well. So it's really nothing easy about understanding the injury, as there's nothing easy about understanding living with a brain injury and the like. So this set of slides is really, again, designed to just give some general information and appreciation for both the complexity and the interrelated nature of the brain. So here you want to really reinforce why no two brain injuries are the same. The factors that are listed here severity of the injury, how it occurred, the quickness of the medical response, those kinds of things, the health of the individual at the time, health, age, at the time of the injury. All of those are factors, and they are highly individual. No two individuals are alike, and so no two brain injuries are going to be alike. And again, that's very, very important for folks to understand, because we like to categorize things. We like to put things in little boxes and understand, once we know this is what A looks like, A will always look like this. But in brain injury, it doesn't work quite that way. And so again, the point here is to understand that as no two individuals are alike, no two brain injuries are alike. And then here you have an opportunity, if you want it, and again, you don't have to go through all of these in detail, but you do have an opportunity, if you want to take it, to talk a little bit about the mechanism of brain injury. If you have a brain model, you can be very dramatic in kind of simulating something. I tend to use a car crash as an example because it's one everybody can visualize. And all, if you want to use slides that move, you can probably demonstrate that on a slide or in a YouTube video. There are plenty of those that you can use here to show something in action. Again, we give you this. I know it's static, so it's not as visually inviting as one that moves itself. But again, what you're going to want to talk about, if you like, is about a car crash, perhaps, and understanding that the car may be going at whatever speed. Of course, you'll remind people that they, of course, will be, or the driver, as will every passenger, of course, will be using their seatbelt. But the car will be stopped, perhaps you lose control, car stopped. But your brain, your head, your body, your brain is going to be moving until something stops it. And then you'll have the immediate hit at the focal damage, that might be, and then you'll bounce back with the coup-contra coup effect, and then the brain, as it settles, will bounce around within the skull. Your script will have for you, of course, ways to suggest to talk about this. You will remind people that the inside of the brain, while we say that the brain is housed in the skull, which is hard, and we all know about having hard heads, that in fact the inside of the skull is not smooth, that it has these bony protrusions. I often talk about them like thorns. And so the brain, which is the consistency of formed jello, and some of you might want to bring that in as a visual and tactile demonstration, will bounce around. And every time the brain bounces around within the skull, it's an opportunity for some kind of damage, shearing, tearing of those patterns, all of those kinds of things, and that all can result in brain damage. You also might want to remind people that the instance of the brain injury itself, of that car crash, the fall, the assault, whatever it is, that's the first piece. But also sometime after the brain injury, that there may be some other things that occur that may affect the brain as well, and that may cause damage. And these are just some of them. Hematoma, brain swelling within the skull, increased intracranial pressure, again within the skull. It may be why you want to monitor, not you, but why people talk about monitoring that, and that may be an understanding with the EMS. You might have infection, seizures. All of these things are opportunities for compounding the damage or for damaging another part of the brain. Again, you might want to, and these are suggestions, you can modify all of this in a way that works for you. You might want to suggest or share the observation that if the brain damage is from a medical incident or you have swelling, or you have deprivation of oxygen to the brain, the damage tends to be more diffuse. It tends to be in many areas of the brain. If the brain damage is related to another kind of incident, like a stroke or an aneurysm or a traumatic injury, it may be more focal, more concentrated. But in any event, it's going to be highly individualized depending on on that individual. So another question here. Most individuals with brain injuries exhibit the same challenges and should be given the same level and type of care. True or false?
I'm launching. Yep, I'm launching the question now. You have about 10 seconds to answer. About 5 more seconds before I close the poll. All right, I'm closing the poll now and sharing the results. And it looks like the majority of the audience answered false, with 94% choosing false.
Okay. Well, good job then. And gave me a chance to have another drink of water. So thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going to move on to be talking about the mechanism, what's a brain injury, those kinds of concepts. We're going to be moving from that to the individual and start talking about what happens, for the individual. And we become quite accustomed to knowing about a typical progress of recovery. We certainly know that there are definitely a path of recovery for cardiac incidents now, for broken bones. You know what the milestones are, and people pretty much follow those kinds of things. However, part of the complexity with brain injury and with providing services to individuals with brain injury is that every person with a brain injury is different, and every brain injury is different. And so, as we said, and this is kind of a review which you might want to use, that there will be vast differences from individual to individual. We're different before the injury, and every brain injury is different. And it may sound like we just keep perseverating on those points, but those are very important take-home points, because, again, what we're going up against is our instinctive nature to put people in categories and to look for that commonality. I've worked with person A who has a brain injury. This is what person A needed. Now I'm working with person B who has a brain injury. I might expect person B to need the same things or be like person A, or if person B is getting the same services, I may think I could just deliver them in the same way. What worked with person A is going to work with person B. But of course we know that that's not necessarily the case. And so it's important just to remember that individuals are different and brain injuries are different from person to person. And everybody will adjust differently to a change that results in a brain injury. And so we need differing levels of support and different kinds of support, and we need it delivered in highly individualized ways and all. And again, it can be extremely frustrating for service provision to feel that sometimes they're starting over with each person. But in fact they are, because each individual will be different, will adjust differently, will require different services, different levels of services, those kinds of things. Again, not an exact science. There are certainly general approaches, and since most of you are providing services in some form or another, I hope you're shaking your heads and agreeing. It's very difficult in a webinar not to see what I hope are nods in understanding what this looks like for folks. But having said that, it's still important to try to organize the information we have about brain injury and about the effects of brain injury. And so the most common effects of brain injury tend to be categorized in these general, broad functional areas. And again, this is shorthand, really, because we can't move forward in what might feel like mush. We really do have to have a way of organizing them. And so the typical organization is in these 5 functional categories: physical, cognitive, executive functioning, the affective behavioral functioning, and psychosocial. Now let me preface this. The next set of slides here really talks about each of these areas. And let me preface this by saying that because each individual is an individual and because each brain injury is individual, you might have, you might see some effects in each of these categories. You might see some cognitive impacts and nothing else. You might see executive functioning and psychosocial and nothing else. So you might see one, you might see all. It reminds me of in my days in school, which were longer ago than I like to think about. We used to have those multiple choice questions, and the choices were, they would give you a scenario and then ask you a question. And so your choices were things like A and B but not C, sometimes D, all of the above, none of the above, A and A, B, C, but not whatever. You know, all of those different changes. And frankly, it made me nuts because it's so many different choices to go through. But in fact, in talking about this, just know you may see some things, you may see none of these things. You may see other things. And all, but what we put together for you to use in the training purposes is some of the most common effects of each of these functional areas. And these will be great opportunities for the folks in your training to talk about or be invited to talk about individuals with whom they are working. Talk about them as illustrations, or maybe raise them as some kinds of problems or some things to talk about. So the first set will be physical. And these can result, you can look at some of these things. They really affect an individual's ability to function at an optimum level during the scheduling, perhaps. If you have an individual who has sleep disturbances, who has a disturbance with the sleep-wake cycle, think about the way therapies are planned. Think about the way appointments are planned. Are they planned when the person is likely to be awake or when the person is very sleepy? We tend to, again, arrange services based on our definition of a day or about daytime hours, 9 to 5 or whatever it is. Well, if you have a person whose sleep-wake cycle is disrupted or who has sleep issues, you may not want to be scheduling things for 8 o'clock in the morning. That may not be the best time. So you really may have to look at what those effects are and how to adjust the services around that individual. Fatigue, those of you working in the area know we're not talking about just being tired. We're talking about really that bone-numbing fatigue that you really can't go on. You have somebody involved in a structured day program who's fatigued, maybe you want to schedule, or somebody who has ILST, independent living skills training, maybe you want to schedule that when later in the afternoon when the person is more awake or beyond that deadening fatigue. Loss of smell and taste, again, we don't think that that's significant, but if you have a person for whom those senses have been either lost or been interfered with, that really can affect the quality of life. quality of life issues. So you don't want to dismiss those or diminish them. Hearing loss, of course, will have to do with volume, visual and balance difficulties. Again, think of physical spaces, both in terms of a living space, but in terms also of an educational space and of a workspace. And think about that. Think about the lights. Many of our workplaces, malls and the like, we have fluorescent lights, which can trigger seizures, or if there's a visual sensitivity, can be very difficult. So again, this is really looking at those kinds of effects that you might have and seeing what's going on in the environment around that individual and what changes may have to be made. Dysarthria, by the way, this always is a question, so I'm anticipating some of you may have that, is a speech-language issue that results in speech sounding like slurred speech. So that becomes important for some people. And also headaches, which is very common with brain injury. And you may be talking about constant headaches, chronic headaches, and the like. And think about what it is to function with a chronic headache. Second area, cognitive, is really often the hallmark of brain injury, is very important. And the short-term working memory is, again, a hallmark, something we see quite frequently. And very often what happens is people providing services or being involved with an individual who has short-term memory problems often find themselves saying, I just told you that. Don't you remember? We just did that. I just said that. The thing is that that individual doesn't remember. And the reason why they don't remember or may not remember is because their brain function that would capture that is what's been damaged. And so it's not really helpful reinforcing your own frustration there. But maybe we work with staff on coming up with other ways of addressing the short-term memory problems. And so for many people, they use Post-its. Or now with all the technology, you might be using some of the apps on a smartphone or on an iPad. Those kinds of supportive or remedial methods for helping address or fill the gap for the short-term memory issues, because those issues have a great impact on functioning. Often, by the way, may be mistaken for denial or for resistance. Or this is a person who doesn't play well, doesn't show up, doesn't follow, doesn't pay attention, is always distracted. Again, look at the environment and look at the way we tend to label people, saying that this person's non-compliant. Well, you know, that's very nice to say. It's actually not very nice to say, but it's easy to label that, when in fact that's not necessarily what's going on with that individual. What's going on is that's the function that's been disrupted. And so it's very, very important, and in working with staff, to focus on ways of understanding and some of the remedial steps that you can take for dealing with that. Again, concentration, distractibility. Think about workplaces, think about environments, think about cubicles or big open spaces, even in a library or a place in the community that somebody may be going to interact or be involved in the community. Think about that, and if the individual has had the ability to filter things out, interfered with, then that's a disaster. There's no way that you can function effectively like that. Also understanding that it may take longer to process information, and so it can't be hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And it can't be constant transitions. It really is allowing time. And what you will do as a trainer or in sharing the information with your staff, or for staff who are on the webinar, what you're going to want to do if these are the effects of the brain injury is really step back and look at the way in which things are organized for that individual to allow for the time and to allow for a process to unfold in a way that doesn't make that individual feel badly that he or she can't function as quickly, probably, as they once were able to. Executive functioning. And again, here you may see some of these issues even in the I hesitate to say milder injuries, because that categorization of a so-called mild brain injury, you know, the injury itself may be anything but mild, or the effects may be anything but mild for that individual. So it's important to remember about that. So here we have these kinds of things. The brain, again, functions as the body's kind of calendar or reminder, those kinds of things. And so when you have an interruption in your executive functioning skills, that's going to spill over to the individual's ability to move successfully through a day, through a class, through a volunteer situation, through an interaction in the community, and the like. It may be that the individual can no longer follow tasks in sequence, can't go from A, B, C, D, and reach the end. So that individual, instead of going direct in a linear fashion from A to D, might go A, C, B, A, D, and then back. So it's important, again, to understand if this is the issue and to respond to that. Self-monitoring sometimes ends up looking like denying of an injury at all, or being not aware of the deficits that might have resulted from the injury. Bringing to completion, as I said, hard to take a task, break it down, and follow the steps in sequence. And so supports are needed to substitute for the brain's ability to do that and to help that individual be able to do that. You're going to look at the environment, the social interactions, what's going on around that individual, and working in that way. The affective behavioral issues. You know, here what you may see is drastic shifts in moods over a short period of time, that emotional lability and the like, irritability, depression, disinhibition, no sense of oneself, no sense of personal space, lost the ability to pick up cues, social cues, and so the interaction with another person may be interfered with. You may have a changed personality. The outgoing person becomes introverted. The introvert becomes the life of the party, as it were, all of those kinds of things. Often difficult in groups, the impulsivity. And the lack of ability to monitor oneself. Again, things you're going to look at. You may see none of these. You may see some of them. Anxiety about everything, impaired judgment. Again, it's really important for the individual providing services to know about these things so that he or she can say, okay, that's an effect of the brain injury, and go from there. And then finally, in the category of psychosocial, and again, here what you're looking at is the results, I think, of a true shaken sense of self. And it's important to ask people, or ask yourself, how would you respond if you could no longer fulfill one or a number of the roles you've created for yourself in your life? So if you are the main source of financial income for your family, and suddenly that was taken away, how would you feel about yourself? what would you think about yourself in relation to that? If you were the main caregiver of a child or a parent or a spouse or whomever in your family, and suddenly that was taken away, your ability to do that, how would you feel about yourself? So it's really about that shaken sense of self and how that permeates different kinds of functions, different kinds of interactions, and all. And so here, there's a lot of the loss of self-esteem, a lot of depression, the shaken sense of self, sense of loss, things that we don't necessarily think about as we move forward, but become very, very important for an individual, or to understand how to provide supports for that individual. Now, again, we went through this very quickly. You may see some of these things. You may see none of them. You may see one from each. Highly individualized. So the whole purpose here is to at least familiarize staff with things they might see that they can tie back to the brain injury. Oh, that's a result of the brain injury. What can I do to change the way I'm behaving, to change the environment, to change the way in which services are being delivered? Or what do I see that the individual needs that maybe nobody else has noticed? And it's really building that sense within the staff of how important they are in supporting this individual, that it's important to go through this. I assure you that there will be many, many, many examples, a lot of discussion coming up in this area that you might want to focus on, or certainly allow time to focus on. So the next question, a common result of brain injury is loss of long-term memory. Individuals who cannot, that was on the slide, but actually we didn't talk about it. Remember who they used to be, true or false?
All right, I'm going to launch that question now. Please take a moment to answer. All right, I'll give a few more seconds to answer before I close the poll. All right, I'm closing the poll now and sharing the results. It looks like 68% answered false and 32% answered true.
Okay, we didn't talk about that, so I apologize for that. I should say, we said that a common result of brain injury is the loss of short-term memory. Very often people do remember who they used to be, and that, of course, leads to or contributes to the sense of depression, frustration, the loss, the grief, those kinds of things. So I apologize for not covering that, but the question is good to remind me as well. We don't have a lot of time, so I apologize. I get going and then I talk too much. So we'll go through some of the rest of this quickly. So then you want to talk about kind of a summary, which we said not everybody will see all of these results. It really is just a way of helping people understand. And you want to remind people, excuse me, that we're talking about a brain that started out intact and then was damaged. So it's important to remind people that the individual with whom they're working may also have many intact abilities. We like to say this is me or you with an area of function changed. And so it's important to remember that individuals with whom staff is working may well be capable of doing a lot of things for themselves, and they may be clear about what they can do, knowing what they can do, and where they need help. They may not be so clear either, so this is, again, a balancing act. So we suggest for you to use something we call ROAD, very quirky little mnemonic, really, which stands for these steps: read, review, observe, ask questions, don't assume. And this is a way just, again, to organize for staff how they might enhance the supports that they're providing. So first on the read or review, we want to encourage people really to read any written information that they're given. And that could include the service plan. It could include medical information. It may not. It could include neuropsychological reports. It may not. Information may be technical, but certainly the service plan will have a lot of useful information. That's a purpose. And if that's available, that would just be good background information about the individual. And again, this is part of the reason. The home and community support staff, in particular, spend so much time with individuals that they can be empowered to bring information back to the team. And so it's both giving them information, but also understanding that, that the information that people glean by being in the home or spending so much time with an individual with brain injury can be important to weave back into the plan. The second, observe. Again, we're talking about active observation. What works, what doesn't work, when does it work? Do you want to do banking, for example, at 2:30 in the afternoon, or does it work better at 9 o'clock in the morning? When will the person be at his or her best? Back to, understanding some of the impacts and asking those kinds of questions. And then, of course, bringing the information back to the team. We like to suggest empowering people to ask questions and ask the individual. Just remember that we have individuals who have things to say about themselves and about what they want. And so you want to empower your staff to ask questions like, how do you think this would work best? What do you think would work better? When in the day do you feel best able to do certain things? And also, those of you who are supervisors, just know that we suggest that it's important to encourage your staff to ask questions of supervisors. You want to make sure that they feel comfortable raising questions in advance if they have questions. And as supervisors, you want to make sure that there's somebody who is available, because, again, this would be a preventive thing. You don't want crises to occur if you can prevent them. And so we want to suggest that the asking questions of everybody working around the individual or with the individual is important. And then the final thing about assuming is this has a number of components. First, it's really important not to underestimate. Don't assume that just because a person has a brain injury, they can't do anything. And very often, people might be far more independent than you as a service provider or as a staff may think. But also, you don't want to overestimate. So while there are intact abilities, there also may be areas of need that may not be apparent. So that what you might experience as a willful decision or a personality trait, or that oppositional behavior, another term that people throw around, or non-compliant, may in fact be masking an area of need that individual has, and that may need to be adjusted. And also not to forget who the individual is, because we don't come in as blank slates either. And so we need to own what our own biases, our own experiences are. And also not to forget that we're working with individuals. So just a quick, very quick story on this. We heard this story when we were doing the pilot testing from an HCSS staff person who talked about having an individual who wanted to travel by himself from his home to a particular location in the community. The family told the staff person, oh no, he can't do it, he's going to get lost, he's going to get this, he's going to get that. Very bad idea. The individual felt very strongly that he wanted to be independent and he could do this and it would be okay. And so, of course, the staff person was kind of in a quandary about what to do about that, not really knowing or being able to assess the level of that individual's skills at being able to do that. So what that staff person decided to do was really to shadow the individual to see. And in fact, what happened was not only was the individual quite capable of getting from home to that place, but also the staff person had a lot more trouble doing that and getting there. And so, it really underscored that, okay, we tested this, and what we saw is that this individual can do this successfully. So that's important, and important to that individual's self-esteem and the like. So again, this is, as with everything, a fine line, but an area where you want your staff who are with those individuals to whom they're providing services to be comfortable, to not forget we have intact abilities and we have areas of need, and how to try to assess what that is in moving forward. And then we have a set of slides that are really the summary of this whole section. Now, I suggest you take longer time than I took here in doing this, because it's important to give people an opportunity to talk about things and all. We want to stress strengths. We don't want to stress weaknesses. Very important to be positive. Very important to know that. Important to be honest. Don't take things personally. When I do this training, when Dr. Marie Cavallo and I have done this training at various times in the past, she always tells us the story about a guy in one of her day programs who would come into her and say, hey, Dr. Cavallo, you need to lose some weight. And she said, yeah, well, okay, maybe I do, and I could take that very personally. But that's not really what's going on. And so it's important not to take it personally. It's not about personally insulting her. It's about the way the person behaves with some brain function interfered with and all. Very, very important. We'll talk about this in a minute, to treat everybody with dignity and respect. And there's some very compelling discussion of this in the Living in the Moment DVD about how important it is to do that, not to talk down to people. Also to allow for grief. We have talked about, or I have mentioned in the slides, and you will have talked about, the sense of loss, profound loss and grief. And you hear people talking about this all the time, grieving for the person who used to be, missing that old person, wanting to be that old person. And that's a huge loss, a huge loss. And we need to allow people to grieve for that loss in order to be able to allow them and support them in moving forward and in being able to take the next steps. And so again, we need to allow time, and we need to allow dignity of that and not diminish the grief, because we're in a hurry to get on with things. And of course, the systems in which all of us work, put a premium on moving things quickly. And so it's easy to fall into that, to default to that kind of behavior. But, we want to suggest that you really help staff understand that this is real and profound for the individual, and necessary to go through that process in order to move on. Understanding yourself and what you bring to the table, and also to reinforce and validate that this is very hard, very, very hard. And a lot of folks, staff, are doing an incredible job with very hard work in supporting individuals with brain injuries. And that's really, really important. And it may be slow, and to remind the individuals with whom they're working, things are very, very slow but keeping going works. And people will share stories. You all, I'm sure, if we were having a discussion, would be able to share stories of successes, however slow it is, of successes for people. And wow, how terrific that feels to be able to move forward that way. And we also think it's important to remind people to take care of themselves, and seeking supervision is a very important piece of that. And to be able to feel good when they've helped somebody accomplish something good, and know that that's acknowledged. And as a supervisor, really important to give people the positive feedback. We're very focused on resolving complaints or resolving problems, those kinds of things. And I think sometimes we forget about acknowledging positive, acknowledging a job well done and all. So another question. Individuals with brain injuries want to be treated in a way that recognizes their ability as well as their disability. True or false?
Right, I'm going to launch that question now. Please take a moment to answer. Give about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. All right, so 96% answered true.
Okay, excellent. I hear myself reading these, and my my New York City accent comes out when I'm tired. Maybe you think it comes out the whole time. Okay, so again, that would be the end of a pretty long segment if you're doing the training. And if you can break it up into having that as its own segment, I think that that would be excellent, because there are a lot of opportunities there for people to talk and to share, and also that's important. Then we move on to another segment, the next segment, which is really segment 3, which is communicating, interacting with, and supporting individuals with disabilities, individuals with brain injuries. So we have notes in the script. One of them will suggest to you that if you are starting here with doing this segment starting here, you might want to show part of the DVD, Living in the Moment, or some of the other icebreakers, the other kinds of things. Also, if you're a waiver provider, a Department of Health TBI waiver provider, here we're also going to be discussing what you might recognize as a waiver participant's Bill of Rights. And again, in the script that you'll be receiving, there are boxes, there are highlighted areas if you're a waiver participant, if you're a waiver provider, that give you some additional information. So the objectives of this segment are really for you to help staff express how they would want to be treated if they had sustained a brain injury, providing a guide for language and discussion, a lot of discussion in this segment, reviewing agency-based strategies for accessing support for everyday decisions and emergencies, developing a conceptual understanding of the dignity of risk, and finally, if you're a waiver provider, understanding the rights of participants. And as I said, in this segment, there is a lot of discussion, a lot of material, a lot of resources, and the like. So starting with communicating with individuals, I'm going to be talking about people first language in particular, and that's, I hope I've modeled it by talking about people with brain injuries, not brain injured people. And it really is the notion of remembering that we are people first, and then whatever other attributes go along with that. It may be a person with a brain injury. Could be a person with brown hair. I mean, whatever it is, we're people first, and then other things. And then again, listening skills and speaking directly to the individual, not to the individual's family unless you want to address that person. Things that really sound like good manners, frankly, in my opinion, but often get skewed when talking to a person with a disability, so that we've all had that experience where you hear people speaking at a much higher volume when addressing a person perhaps who's a wheelchair user. I mean, one thing has nothing to do with the other, but it reflects a discomfort. And so the whole purpose here is that you really want to address those things by providing a safe environment in which to discuss those. And here, again, and I'm not going to discuss these, but we want to have questions that your staff will talk about. These are common kinds of things that come up. And so we want to just talk about these kinds of questions, give people an opportunity to talk through. You may have others in your agencies that you may want to add to this. Again, up to you. And one of the handouts you have is this very excellent publication from the State Department of Health called People First. And again, that's the primary objective. And this goes through a number of these scenarios and gives you ways of talking to these issues, which are very real and frankly can get in the way of providing quality services and all. So that's this section of the presentation. And then you're going to move into really this cluster that had its origins in the Department of Health Waiver Participants' Rights section, but really for everybody, it really clusters a number of important concepts, again, general concepts, engender significant discussion about providing services and all. So the first one really has to do with personal dignity. And again, we're starting from a place of recognizing and respecting the individual and the rights of each individual. The ability to support but not to control decision-making, which is essential to an individual's rebuilding of self-esteem. So you don't want to keep repeating instructions or information if you have somebody with a short-term memory issue. You really want to reflect and support the personal dignity of that individual. And for many people, accepting help or accepting that they can no longer do things that they were able to do is a real blow to their self-esteem. And so think about how that might feel when you are working. And as I say, staff will definitely have things to say for this. The second kind of cluster, and we've clustered the waiver rights in this way, has to do with privacy. And now we all need some level of privacy, and it's very important. Remember that this can present a lot of challenges for direct care staff, because remember, staff may be working in the home of the individual for many hours every day. And that can be hard for the individual. Not everybody wants people around or wants someone around, and staff should not be acting in a way that this is their home or so it's a very delicate balance again. And you want to also enhance the ability of people that are being served to have adult relationships and choices, but you also want to balance that with judgment. And again, these are areas for some further staff training, perhaps, about how to help balance those kinds of things. Formal staff training you may want to have to address behaviors such as sexual behavior when you're working with adults, alcohol, drug use, agency policies for working on these issues and for supporting individuals. You may have the hovering family member, everybody's experienced that, who can't let go of his or her concerns about the growing independence and recovery of the participant, especially as that individual may be developing their own relationships now or being more involved in the community. So privacy, again, very, very important, very thorny, raises lots of issues, definitely an area for significant further discussion. Personal choices, again, here it's the importance of creating the balance between autonomy and protection. So personal choice is a core value, should be supported by direct care staff and by the agency. And so understanding how that personal choice and growing independence can collide with safe behaviors or getting through daily tasks are really the center of this discussion. And again, it's focusing on developing that trust and developing that partnership and understanding the flexibility on the part of the staff, because things will change as the person moves along, as the relationship grows, all of those kinds of things. And here, that's where you will want to focus discussion. Self-identification of goals and desires. Again, this concept of the dignity of risk. It's not only succeeding. We want everybody to succeed. But sometimes, as we know, you can learn as much from failure as from success. So it becomes important to understand the dignity of risk. And the staff has a unique opportunity to encourage positive growth. Here we're talking about encouraging the individual to move out of perhaps a zone of comfort in order to enhance growth. So we want to challenge limits, but we want to balance that against a realistic understanding of capacity. And we may see changed capacity, and so this will change over time. So this is a concept that's critical to the success of the individual, but may, of course, pose challenges for staff. And again, the supervisory support becomes very important so that the staff can work through this in a way that is comfortable, but that also supports the individual. Again, a lot of opportunity for discussion here. The next kind of cluster is freedom from abuse. And so here you're going to start by confirming, of course, that abuse of any kind is unacceptable. But there are certainly concrete forms of abuse, and there are less concrete forms of abuse. There are really very fine lines here, other than physical abuse, which tends to be much more clear. And so in particular, verbal abuse, psychological abuse are areas that need to be discussed here because they are harder to define. They are harder to wrap your mind around. Language, attitude, perspective are all parts of that. And it's not only that the individual is entitled to be free from abuse, but also the converse is that staff can be protected from abuse as well. And so here again, from an agency perspective, is a terrific opportunity to review your agency's policies and strategies for behavior that crosses acceptable boundaries. And really allows staff a lot of time to talk about some concerns, some experiences they may have had, perhaps role play, some ways in which they might respond, all of those kinds of things, emergency policies, backup telephone numbers, anything that really help staff be able to be comfortable around this cluster of principles, or again, if you're a waiver participant, of rights. And then we can talk finally of freedom from isolation. One of the things we know with brain injury is that so many people experience isolation. They lose family members, the novelty wears off, friends leave them, they're no longer involved in the same activities in which they had been involved before their brain injury. They're frustrated, they can't go back to work the way they were, they can't go out in the same way, and it results in isolation. They find themselves by themselves a lot, or by themselves with the staff that are providing services, which isn't necessarily the same thing. And so it's critical to acknowledge that social, emotional isolation can be detrimental to a person's sense of self, to the way a person lives his or her life. And so here it's important to remind your staff that family, friends move away quite often after the brain injury. As I said, after the novelty wears off, after the brain injury becomes old news. They also want the old person back sometimes. And so supporting and maintaining active lives following a brain injury is a big challenge for anybody with a brain injury, and very, very important for staff. And the potential for taking control away from the individual just further erodes their sense of self and further builds isolation. So it's important to find out the kinds of activities the individual with brain injury might like to do, might like to be involved in, opportunities for volunteer work, opportunities for being involved in a religious organization in his or her community, those kinds of things. And finally, that control is not a substitute for interaction. And the negotiation is really the discussion. What do you think would work? What are you interested in? Do you want to go to a sporting event? And if you're going to a sporting event, kind of trying to think through what the issues are in that kind of environment and how to address those so that the individual can get back to developing those kinds of relationships and to combat the isolation. And here the growing independence becomes very important. That's the last part of that cluster. So that's really the end of the whole training. As I said, I modeled this in the Train the Trainer model. The information you will have has the script, has slides, has the handout, has the suggestions, and the like. And you see why we really would encourage you to break this into pieces if your agency can support that. This is some information about the Brain Injury Association of New York State. We hope you're members. If not, membership information is certainly available on our website, and we invite you to be involved with us in our programs and activities and in our resources. We want to be your partner and support, as part of the brain injury community, in particular with regard to the Department of Health waiver in New York State. There is a booklet, the cover, that's available for download on our website, and you have the link for it there, both in English and in Spanish. Of course, if you're from another state, feel free to download it as well. It might provide some useful information for you. This is our contact information. Again, we invite you to please contact us if we can provide further information, resources, and supports for you. And this is, of course, the support for the webinar. And thank you very much for your attention today. I hope that you found this useful and informative, and I wish you a lot of luck as you move forward through providing this information and enhancing the skill level of your staff.